You have heard from me about the Shelsheles Shel Halacha Shel Rabbi Wolf Leiter as it relates to the Beth David. This is the Beth David printed in about the year 2000 by Rabbi Buchsbaum. We've discussed that at length. I want to explain to you that this was an outgrowth of the earlier years of Rabbi Leiter. A lot of those things are in there actually, from years 12 to 20. Okay, but there are other things that were prior to that. Yes, at the age of 3, he'd been taught by his mother, the Breyer, the Doris, the generations, all the way down to the end of Bias, Shani, I believe, as well as the entire knowledge of many of the Hasidic greats of previous generations. She came from a family of Hasidim of Belz. Her father was a Talmud Chacham and a Dayan in Belz who didn't have to take money for Din Torahs because he was an Oisher and he used to study the Nosei Kalim, the commentaries on Choshen Mishpat, at night when it was dark, off by heart. He really was a Talmud Chacham and a Chosid of Belz. And she knew all the stories, all the Maaseh Rav, the actions of the great rabbis that one could learn from, just like you learn a Sefer Halacha. Okay. I want to bring to your attention a very interesting work. This work, if we can focus in on it, is very interesting. By the time Rabbi Leiter was about to enter his bar mitzvah, he had corresponded with many of the greats and met many of the greats of halacha in Galicia. He was taken with his father to see them. He met Reb David Moshe of Chortkiv, the son of the Rizhiner, the 5th son. He was supposed to go to him to put on his film, but unfortunately he was no longer in the world, so he went to another great relative who married one of the daughters of the Rizhiner, I believe, and that's where he put on his film. There is a very interesting little book that he authored. If you can focus in on it, if you don't mind, look at this. The Sefer Divrei Chachomim. The cover page was also authored or drawn by Rabbi Leiter. As some have remarked to me, he had some artistic talent. In any case, this is a book, not a small notebook, but many pages in it, well over, how should we say, well over 70, I would say close to 70 pages, okay, in it. And in it, Rabbi Leiter discusses his knowledge and sources for statements in the Talmudic tractate Gittin, the tractate on Jewish divorce. At the end, he has a collection of letters that he copied from Gedolei Yisrael, from great authorities in the Jewish firmament of Jewish law. And the Marsham, I believe, is in there, from Shalom Mordechai HaKohen Shvedron. He also has 15 general principles that he was able to put together in the area of Jewish divorce from this work on Gittin. Remember, he's not bar mitzvah yet, and he's bringing out general principles that will be upheld through the Talmud and through the Talmudic literature, the cognate literature which follows, and the Shelsheles and the commentaries of the Rishonim, the early commentators, and the Achronim, the later ones. That itself is very remarkable. It gives you a picture of a person before he went to the Beis David. He was on the road. From the time he was free, when he was being taught by his mother, when he was 6, when he was going to the Beis HaMedrash, or when he was going to the synagogue, he was studying this tractate, much of it off by heart. And by the time he was 13, he had already discussed matters with many Gedolim and received response from them and replied, and back and forth had Torah discussions with them through the mails, in addition to, on occasion, being able to meet with them. At the age of 15 and a half, he met with a rabbi of Brody, Rabbi Steinberg, one of the big 3 in halacha in Galicia after the passing of the Marsham Rab Sholem Mordechai Cohen Shvedron. He, together with Rabbi Meir Arik and Rabbi Joseph Engel, were considered the major figures and sources of the decisions that were truly binding on all, in Galicia and beyond. When he met with him, he was 15 and a half, and he made such an impression that the Rabbi Steinberg would write later to his grandson about the greatness of this young man and about his future as a gadol, as one of the 2 greats in the nation of Israel in Jewish law. The cornerstones were being laid all the time. The edifice was being built. This was the first major beginning. And there were some very interesting comments in there in general, on general matters. Already, he was a mature mind. And his mother played a major role in Rabbi Leiter's memoirs. When he writes, when he was only 6 or 7, his mother did not allow him to be disturbed while he was learning, as if he were an adult, as if he were some kind of authority of a community or something, working on something important. And he was working on something important. The acquisition of more and more and more knowledge. He pursued knowledge, like the Rambam writes. He pursued Chokhmah. Pursuant to all of these things, we find the Beth David. And remember, there was a war in between. And Rabbi Leiter went into Amsterdam. He was sent there, given a letter by Rabbi Meir Arik, who was tremendously impressed with his qualities of knowledge of law, being able to deal with people, and having many other things that people of 3 times his age were just hoping they could reach. And he was very successful in Amsterdam. Rabbi Meir Shapiro, a dear friend of his, another Chortkever chassid, wrote, "Who can forget the tremendous things you did during that terrible time, the wartime, the way you..." In other words, he was alluding to his organizing the community there for the young people and the older people, and answering, questions to the people of Amsterdam, not only the people of Amsterdam, but their great authorities that they had there. He was this very, very special person before he went to America in 1920, the end of 1920. Let's go, though, to the Shelsheles Halacha of Rabbi Leiter once again. And what does it have? We see a very interesting work, and this is called a V'Taroshin Shorishonim. This is a work on Gittin put out in 1946, right after the war, in which he writes he would like to give a comprehensive scholarly introduction, a moboi, but the tragedies of his mishpacha, his entire family being wiped out, took from him the ability to really give an appropriate moboi. Nevertheless, the work that he had piled up through the years, the work that he had continued to do in the area of Gittin, actively in Pittsburgh the issues of Aguna, working to see that people should give, how should we say, a get in a city where a civil divorce was considered sufficient decades before by a decree of the four Reform rabbis. And he overturned it by going directly to the Reform rabbis, speaking to them in a manner that was civil, in a manner that showed a degree of respect for them. And they were persuaded by his charm and his knowledge and his Oxfordian English to acquiesce and work with him on that matter, and even on matters of Shmir Shabbos, to some degree. Limited, but to some degree. The Federation building, eventually, one of the last two in the city, in the country of America, was open on Shabbos. All the other ones had closed. Just two remained. One in Pittsburgh. Well, the Reform rabbis acquiesced to his work, and so did the Federation, and they shut it down because they wanted to show respect to people of the Orthodox persuasion, how discomforting it was to them, etc., and to remove a little more of that schism, that divide that was pulling us apart and affecting us in a lot of ways amongst the Jewish people. But this work, what I'm telling you now, 1946, would be reprinted in the year 2000 again, besides the Beth David, by Rabbi Buxbaum's Machon, Yerushalayim, and then eventually Rabbi Leiter's work, his notes on Yevamot and on Kedushin. I want to close this part with one anecdote. When I happened to visit the Encyclopedia Talmudis in 2017, a gentleman who works there met me, and he heard the name Leiter, and he asked me, "Are you related to Rabbi Wolf Leiter of Pittsburgh?" I said, "Well, I'm the Ben Zikunim." And what he told me was interesting. I work in the area of variant readings. The early readings we have from the Ksav Yad of Munich and Berlin and Erfurt. I work in that area. And we have computers today. We can look at tens of thousands of books where they bring down readings they had many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago. Some of the readings that your father has in this book, Mitorah Shelsheles, printed in 1946, cannot be found by our computers in any other place. Not in any of the other tens of thousands of books from Rishonim and Achronim can we find these variant readings. In other words, I told him, as I thought before, you have validated my thoughts that Rabbi Wolf Leiter was before computers, and to a degree, he remains after the computers. 70 years later, still very, very important to major scholars on their work, that Encyclopedia Talmudis, being headed today by Dr. Rabbi Steinberg, the great-grandchild of the Rabbi Steinberg, one of the great rabbis and a member of the Big Three in Galicia over 90 years ago. An amazing scholar whom my father merited to meet.